Okay, so welcome everyone, and especially it's our great honor to have Professor Jeffrey Sachs here. Jeffrey Sachs is a university professor at the Columbia University, and he is a world-renowned economics professor, best-selling author, innovative educator, and a global leader in sustainable development. I think after the Confucius-Aristotle Symposium of this year, many Chinese people became very familiar with Professor Sachs. And it's also our honor to have two honorable panelists here. One is Professor Fan Heping at Southeast University. Another panelist is Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker at Yale University. And before the lecture, we should welcome Professor Tu Weiming to say some words. Okay.
That's it.
Professor Tu.
Greetings, everybody. I am Tu Weiming on behalf of the Institute for Advanced Humanistic Studies at Peking University. I'd like to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs to offer his global perspective on sustainable growth. Before then, I would like to welcome Professor Wu Fei of Peking University, both in history, in philosophy, and religious studies. And it is a true honor to invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs to come to Peking University to address such a grandiose subject. I would like to introduce first our host for this evening, Professor Wu Fei. Professor Wu is both in history, in philosophy, and religion. He is also the director of the Center for the Study of Ritual in China. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Wu Fei to host this evening's event. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you very much for the words of Professor Tu. And I just briefly introduced Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and I mentioned that after the event of this year, I mean the Confucius-Aristotle Symposium, because some words, some famous words of Professor Sachs became very popular among Chinese audience. And today, the topic of Professor Sachs' lecture is global ethics and sustainable development. And I think it would be a very exciting event. And Professor Sachs did not give us an APP, PowerPoint, or other things for this event. So we are very urgent to know what he will talk about this big topic. Now we will give time to Professor Sachs. Welcome, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Wu Fei. Thank you, Professor Tu Weiming. It is really a profound honor and joy for me to be together with you, together with my dear colleague, Mary Evelyn Tucker, and I'm so excited to hear her words as well, and to be part of this great university and the Institute for Advanced Humanistic Studies. The Xinyi lecture is a great honor and a great occasion for us to think together about our current global challenges and how ethics, global ethics, can help us to find our way through an extraordinarily complex and an extraordinarily dangerous moment in human history. Well, I want to start with the concept of sustainable development because I believe that it helps us to orient to the current crisis in the world. The idea of sustainable development is to take a holistic view of our situation as human beings in society and to create a normative framework for good lives for people in all parts of the world. The notion of sustainable development, as adopted by all of the 193 UN member states, for example, in adopting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the year 2015, is that sustainable development entails 4 interconnected objectives for society. The first is material well-being, the idea that people everywhere in the world, given our know-how, our technological capacity, should be able to live lives of material sufficiency, to live lives of dignity free from extreme deprivation. We should have no poverty in a world of plenty. And indeed, China, of course, celebrated in the year 2020 the end of extreme poverty in China, a remarkable achievement that over the course of 40 years, China was able to end a chronic high rate of poverty and to eliminate poverty by the year 2020. The second dimension of sustainable development is social justice and social inclusion. The idea that it is not sufficient to have an average level of prosperity or sufficient for some parts of society, some regions, or men rather than women, or some social groups or religious groups to thrive while others are left behind. Social justice and social inclusion means that societies are organized for the common good. And as we say at the United Nations, that nobody is left behind. And that means also no social group, no gender, no group because of religious affiliation or even geography within a country or a region. The third dimension of sustainable development is environmental sustainability, living in harmony and consistently with the Earth's physical systems, including the biosphere, the Earth's living environment. Of course, as biological species, we depend on our harmony with the Earth's physical systems, and yet they are, of course, under tremendous, indeed unprecedented stress and danger. And the fourth dimension of sustainable development is peace. Peace, and I would say in Chinese terms, harmony, that we can live together, that we can find a unity in diversity, that we can live now at a globally interconnected scale in mutual respect and in peace across nations. This is the concept of sustainable development as it has developed over time and as it is represented in the Sustainable Development Goals. When one thinks specifically about those goals, the economic objectives that I mentioned include the first of the SDGs, to end extreme poverty, SDG 2, to end hunger, SDG 3, to ensure health coverage for all people, SDG 4, to ensure that there's a place in school for every child, at least through the upper secondary level, SDG 6, that everybody has access to safe water and sanitation, SDG 7, that everybody has access to modern energy services, meaning electricity and clean cooking fuels, and the range of environmental objectives, for example, SDG 11, that our urban environments should be sustainable, SDG 12, that pollution is kept to low and safe levels, SDG 13, that the climate is protected and that we are protected from climate change, SDG 14, that our marine ecosystems, our coastal areas, our wetlands, our oceans are managed sustainably, and SDG 15, that our terrestrial environment is sustainably managed. And then the goals of peace and cooperation are reflected in SDG 16, which calls for peaceful societies, and SDG 17, which calls for global cooperation. It's quite a wonderful achievement, actually, that despite all of the controversies in the world and all of the differences across nations, that the entire membership of the United Nations, all 193 UN member states, were able to agree on these 17 objectives, state goals clearly, even state-specific targets for these 17 goals, put timelines on, and set a common global agenda. Well, if the world worked properly, we would be on our way to achieving the goals that the world has adopted, and perhaps my talk would lack drama, but it would express a satisfaction that the world is on its way in this time of vast technological progress in achieving the goals that we've set. But of course, everybody that is participating in today's lecture knows full well that we are not at a global scale achieving these goals. Far from it. Indeed, in every one of these objectives, we face critical crises rather than horizons of achievement. The world as it's organized today, our institutions, our economic system, our politics, our geopolitics, and I will emphasize our ethics as we practice our ethics, are not oriented towards the success of sustainable development. Indeed, we are in a drama globally that is in many ways unprecedented and of unprecedented danger. Let me consider briefly the 4 pillars of sustainable development to give us some context. With respect to material well-being, in some ways, the news would seem to be good. The world economy is vast. It is now $110 trillion of annual output worldwide for the 8 billion people on the planet. And this means that we are roughly at $13,000 average per person. Well, that's quite a remarkable achievement, without question, a historic achievement, the result of generations now of economic development and technological advance. But, of course, that $13,000 per person is so unevenly distributed that some places, such as where I am at this moment in New York City, and I'm within a radius, I believe, of several dozen billionaires, in fact, here on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Those billionaires have as their counterpart at the other end of the world distribution of income and wealth around 1 billion people today who had to struggle for their very survival. They are hungry. They lack access to the most basic sanitation and safe water. They lack access to even basic health services if those are necessary. Hundreds of millions of their children are not in school because the societies in which they live do not have the wherewithal even to ensure classrooms and qualified teachers for all of the children. Hundreds of millions of people lack electricity or safe cooking fuels. They're relying on perhaps wood collected from the local forest, leading to deforestation in their neighborhoods, but also lung disease in their small homes where smoke-filled rooms are of great danger in unsafe cooking. So the world is rich, but there are at least 1 billion people living in extreme poverty, and the progress is far, far too slow to achieve the goals that we've set. I noted that China is our guiding star, our inspiration, because China, by most measures, was perhaps with 70% of the population in extreme poverty as recently as the late 1970s. And now China is without extreme poverty. This is not only a cause for tremendous celebration, but is also an inspiration for the regions in the world that are looking for the pathway out of poverty. When it comes to social inclusion and social justice, well, it's not only the economic inequalities, but it is the access to public services, it is the discrimination, the violence that many communities face that shows that we are not achieving the goals of social inclusion. Of course, when we come to the third pillar of sustainable development, environmental sustainability, not only are we failing to achieve environmental sustainability, we are, as everybody knows, at an unprecedented global crisis. Never before in civilizational history have we faced the scale of environmental crisis that we face today. In some ways, of course, the scale of the crisis is a reflection of the economic success. But economic success in a system of markets and institutions which have manifestly failed to protect the natural environment as economies have developed over generations. And as everybody understands, we face at least 3 dire, complicated, interconnected environmental crises. Human-induced climate change is perhaps the most novel and also the most dramatic. The world has already reached the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming that we promised in the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 not to reach. In other words, we've already broken the threshold that we said was too dangerous for humanity to contemplate. And we are on our way to much higher rates of warming and even the possibility of runaway climate change if some of the feedback effects are as dangerous as they might be. For example, we have learned recently that methane has been pouring into the atmosphere in recent years, not only because of human causes, for example, of the use of natural gas and the leakage of natural gas from pipelines and from pumping sites, but also for natural reasons that as the climate has become warmer, the activity of bacteria in wetlands has become also at a higher metabolic rate, and that is releasing methane from rice fields and from other wetlands and from natural habitats where anaerobic respiration occurs. The second of these environmental crises is the loss of biodiversity, and that is coming partly from the human-induced climate change, but also partly from land use change, massive deforestation, for example, in the tropical forests in the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, and in Southeast Asia. There's a huge demand for tropical hardwoods. They are being felled for the purposes of international markets, and we are losing irreplaceable ecosystems. And the third of these interconnected environmental crises is the pervasive pollution of the air, the water, the soils, and the oceans. Toxic chemicals, plastics in the food chain, aerosol pollutants, all claiming years of life expectancy, causing chronic disease, and also pushing other species to extinction. Now, if this were not enough, the economic, the social, and the environmental challenges, the fourth area of sustainable development, peace and global cooperation, may well be the most fraught of all of them. I often refer to the words of President John F. Kennedy in his first inaugural address, when he said, "For the world is very different now. Mankind holds in its mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." And what Kennedy was referring to, of course, was the nuclear sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. We are a world of thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons that could not only destroy civilizations, but destroy life on Earth and end the human species itself. And while we have been living with this nuclear danger since the beginning of the atomic age in 1945, the fact of the matter is, the stunning, shocking fact of the matter is that in many ways we are probably closer to nuclear war than at any time since the start of the nuclear age. I often refer to the doomsday clock, which is a graphic device introduced by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in the United States in 1947. The idea of the atomic scientists was to help the public understand that the nuclear age was something different from all of past history. Wars have been part of human history from time immemorial, but a nuclear war would end history itself. And the atomic scientists struggled to help humanity understand the unprecedented nature of our era in the nuclear age. So they introduced the doomsday clock to indicate how close or how far the world was because of geopolitical tensions from a nuclear war. And when the clock was introduced as a new graphic device for public awareness in 1947, the atomic scientists put the minute hand at 7 minutes away from midnight. And during times of international tension, the minute hand was moved closer to midnight when the experts at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists were telling the world, we are in danger. And at times of global cooperation and détente, the minute hand was moved away from midnight to say, we're easing tensions, we're controlling nuclear arms, we're reducing the risks of nuclear war. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the doomsday clock is closer to midnight now than it has ever been in our history since 1947. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists puts the doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight. And why do they do so? Because we have great power tensions that are extraordinarily dangerous. There is, in fact, a direct hot war underway between the two leading nuclear superpowers, the ones with the most nuclear armaments, the United States and Russia. This, of course, is the war in Ukraine, a war that never should have taken place, a war that was absolutely preventable and avoidable, a war that, in my opinion, was provoked by the United States of America, by the US idea of moving its military to Russia's border by incorporating NATO, Ukraine into NATO, into the US military alliance. This was a provocative and dangerous and reckless move, in my view, that has led to this war. But what we have today is an actual war in which the United States is targeting US-made missiles deep inside of Russian territory. And the Russian government has said, do not do this. This puts our national security at grave risk. And we will respond with escalation if this continues. And we are therefore in a mode of escalatory danger between these two nuclear superpowers. But of course, we see conflicts in many parts of the world. We have seen the collapse of the government of Syria yesterday at the hands of militant jihadists. And indeed, much of the Middle East is at war and in deep crisis. Again, I believe there are underlying political reasons for that. I believe that Israel's blockage of an independent state of Palestine has been one of the provocations that has led to widening war. The fact of the matter is we are in an extraordinarily dangerous situation in the Middle East, where the ongoing wars in Palestine, in Lebanon, now in Syria, could explode again into a region-wide or even a world war. And we all know about the tensions between the United States and China in East Asia. Again, my own view is that the United States is irresponsible in its attitudes because it has degraded its own diplomacy, its own commitment to the one China policy and so forth. So I worry very much about unnecessary tensions. We want security and peace. And this is the highest value that we have. So on all four of the dimensions of sustainable development, though we are in a world of unprecedented technological mastery, a world that, as President Kennedy says, has the means to end all forms of human poverty, we find ourselves in a world of continued poverty in the midst of wealth. We find ourselves with extreme inequalities of income and wealth and status. We find ourselves with enormously complex and even runaway environmental crises. And we find ourselves with tremendous geopolitical tensions, so high that we may be closer to nuclear war disaster than at any time in human history. Our challenge, therefore, is to find the way forward, to understand how we can not only face these challenges, but succeed in creating lives of security, peace, and prosperity, and how we can combine economic and social well-being with environmental sustainability. In other words, our challenge is to achieve the goals that we have adopted when we adopted sustainable development as the organizing principle for global cooperation. Well, what we can see is that our current political, economic, social, and geopolitical systems are not conducive to sustainable development. There's nothing automatic about the sustainable development agenda. There's no magic of the marketplace. There's no invisible hand, in the phrase of the 18th century British economist Adam Smith, that is automatically going to guide the world to sustainable development. In order to achieve sustainable development, we are going to have to choose collectively in a shared way at a global scale a pathway to sustainable development. And this is our truly great global challenge, to act together on behalf of an interconnected world and on behalf of future generations to achieve the goals that we have set out to achieve. Well, in order to do this, I'm going to refer to the great founder of Western philosophy, Aristotle, to emphasize that Aristotle identified three kinds of knowledge that we need for achieving a good life. And Aristotle made these observations around 330 BC, so 2,300 years ago. He said we need three kinds of knowledge for success. We need what the ancient Greeks called epistemic knowledge, or scientific understanding of how the world works. We need what the ancient Greeks called techne, or technical knowledge, to understand how we can use our scientific knowledge to solve human problems, to create an economic framework or a technological framework to achieve our goals. And third, we need ethical knowledge, what the ancient Greeks called etika. That is knowledge for choosing the good for society so that we can achieve human well-being. Each of these three kinds of knowledge, epistemic, technical, and ethical knowledge, are absolutely central for success. Let me say briefly a few words about the epistemic and technical knowledge, and then finally turn to the question of ethical knowledge. When it comes to the epistemic knowledge, it's vital that we understand the functioning of the Earth's physical systems. We need the climatology, we need the hydrology, we need the ecology in order to understand our current state and what we need to do to protect nature as we endeavor to end poverty, hunger, and other extreme deprivation. And we have, of course, understood through the technical knowledge the sources of human-induced climate change, the greenhouse gas emissions. We have understood the drivers of land use change that threaten biodiversity. We have understood the chemical pollutants that cause lung disease and that damage the physical environment. Our epistemic knowledge is vast and growing rapidly. The second area of knowledge has advanced perhaps even faster, and that's our technical knowledge. We are in an era of unprecedented technological advance, and I'm very happy to say that China is in the forefront of many of these key technologies. China is the world leader in developing zero carbon energy, the world leader in low-cost renewable energy, the world leader in advanced battery technologies, the world leader in low-cost electric vehicles, the world leader in fourth-generation nuclear, the world leader in fast intercity rail. China, the world leader, I should say, in 5G or 5.5G digital connectivity. China has surged to the forefront in technology, and this is a gift for the whole world. This is something that should be not only applauded and admired, but absolutely recognized as a Chinese contribution for world benefit. And with all of this vast knowledge, and especially the dramatic advances recently in the digital technologies, including artificial intelligence, we have the means to address the technical problems. And this is extraordinarily important and exciting. And as I've said, China's own economic success over the past 45 years provides a guidepost and an inspiration for today's still poor regions. But that brings me to the third of the kinds of knowledge, and that is the ethical knowledge that we need in order to achieve the good. This is perhaps the greatest challenge that we face, and that is the knowledge of how to live together peacefully and well on a crowded planet. And here I want to emphasize how we can find a path to global understanding. Let me start with the wrong way. Currently, the United States is heir to a philosophical tradition that I attribute especially to British philosophy, and to a British philosophical tradition that accompanied Britain's rise as the world's leading imperial power by the time of the 19th century. British philosophy from Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, created a philosophical tradition that accompanied the rise of empire and in many ways served the rise of empire. This British philosophical tradition said, in the words of Thomas Hobbes, the 17th century British philosopher who lived during Britain's civil war of the 1640s and 1650s, that life is short, solitary, brutish, and poor, and that man is condemned to a battle with other men, and that human beings are consumed by insatiable desires and lusts for wealth, for fame, for glory, for power, that inevitably leads to human conflict. His vision was a vision of conflict that could only be contained by an all-powerful state, Hobbes's famous Leviathan. Well, this idea that human beings are by nature in struggle is in a deep way at the core of much of British philosophy that later became American philosophy. The idea is struggle and competition are inevitable, and that power, if properly channeled, can lead to vast wealth, to the wealth of nations. It can also be necessary in a very struggle for survival, as Thomas Malthus and 19th century British thinkers, the so-called social Darwinists, introduced. But I would say that for reasons of history and reasons of philosophical thought, this British philosophical tradition created a framework in which power and conflict were viewed as the normal state of affairs. Indeed, when this philosophy was turned into a theory of international relations, the so-called realist theory in the Anglo-Saxon tradition of international relations theory, the idea is that countries naturally are in conflict with each other, that conflict is inevitable, that war is inevitable. Indeed, one of our greatest scholars of international relations has as his most famous volume, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, as the title, because in the realist theory of international relations in the Anglo-Saxon ethical tradition, conflict is inevitable, and therefore tragedy is the inevitable concomitant of relations across states. Well, my view is that this philosophical approach, which I would broadly call the Anglo-Saxon philosophy from the 17th to the 21st century, is problematic. It sees a world in conflict. It sees competition as inevitable. In its extreme forms, it even envisions that we are in a struggle of all against all, a war of all against all for survival. And one can see how immediately this gives rise to a belief in the inevitability of conflict and indeed of the apparent necessity to prepare always for war. Well, I want to contrast this obviously with China's profound philosophical tradition of Confucianism and a deeper Western philosophical tradition of Aristotle that take a completely different view of our social and political life and of our prospects for cooperation. Of course, the core of Confucian philosophy is the potential for harmonious life, for lives of mutual respect, where the golden rule of Confucius is supreme, where individuals, and especially people of training, gentlemen, properly oriented people, understand to not do to others what one would not have done to themselves, as Confucius taught. And Confucius's belief, and a fundamental belief in the potential of harmony in society, indeed in the idea not of Hobbes, of an all-powerful Leviathan that stops the murder of all against all through force, but rather through the inspiration of a moral rule that encourages the best of the virtues of individuals in the society. What I find thrilling about the Confucian ideas of harmony and peaceful coexistence, the idea that all men are brothers within the four C's, is the potential for peaceful coexistence and for orientation of our societies, our governments, our economies towards the common good. And it is in the Confucian spirit that China has put forward the 5 principles for peaceful coexistence that I find to be tremendously powerful and inspiring for how the nations of the world can live harmoniously together, not in an anarchy of war of all against all, but rather in a world of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and a belief in mutual benefit through cooperation. Now, we are in a world challenge where we need actions across the world. And for that reason, perhaps for the first time in history so dramatically, we need a global ethic as well. Not an ethic that simply passes over each of our traditions, but an ethic in which each part of the world can find its own philosophical roots and its philosophical strengths and its own cultures as inspiration. And what I would like to propose in closing is that we have the possibility to build on the Confucian virtues by recognizing that many other virtue traditions, also in Western civilization, in Islamic civilization, in Buddhist cultures, all point in the same direction, that human beings have the potential through the cultivation of their excellences, through the cultivation of virtue, to be individuals that pay mutual respect to each other, that live harmoniously with each other, that can be good citizens where their focus and attention is directed towards the common good, and in which nations can live together not in the anarchy of conflict or the tragedy of great power politics, but in a peaceful coexistence that aims for the global good. Aristotle, like Confucius, emphasized the potential of personal virtue and the potential of political virtue. Aristotle brilliantly combined two leading studies, his Nicomachean Ethics on personal ethics with his Politics on societal ethics. And he brought the two together, saying that societies can help cultivate personal virtues, and the virtues of citizens can help to achieve the virtues of society as a whole. I'm absolutely convinced that Confucius and Aristotle would have had a wonderful time together. Their approaches are different. Their emphases are different. Confucius emphasized ritual as a path to the cultivation of virtue. Aristotle emphasized rationality and practical wisdom as the path to individual excellence. But the two, I'm convinced, would have gotten along very deeply because they were both optimists about the potential for human nature and the potential for human societies to live in harmony. And what I hope we can see in the coming years, especially through the brilliant work of the Institute for Advanced Humanistic Studies at Peking University, and through the wonderful initiatives of the Chinese government, including the Global Civilization Initiative, we can help to find a global virtue ethics that draws on the finest traditions of our ancient wisdom, but emphasizes the potential of human beings to be oriented towards the common good and towards peace. And by building that common global virtue ethics, I believe we can add that final piece of critical knowledge together with our scientific and our technical knowledge to find the way to achieve sustainable development. So thank you so much for letting me share these thoughts with you today. Thank you again for the wonderful work of the Institute for Advanced Humanistic Studies and for the great honor to deliver the Xinyi lecture today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for Professor Sachs' exciting lecture. Although you don't have a draft, but we can hear it very clearly. And I think you make your main points very clearly, and everyone here should get your points. Yeah. Now we will have two panelists. So first we will have Professor Fan Heping.
我对刚才这个桑树教授谈的关于这个全球伦理跟可持续发展的一些重要的观点非常感兴趣。但是呢，我认为呢，我讨论的关键这个核心问题是，认为这个可持续发展的根本解决方案，如果从全球伦理这个角度来看的话，是要建立一种新的文明观，这就是伦理文明观。著名经济学家阿马蒂亚森曾经出版过一部著名的著作。 题目叫做以自由看待发展。现在面对日益严峻的人类危机，这一命题需要扩展。我们需要根本改变自己的发展观和文明观，建立一种伦理文明观，这样才能真正通过全球伦理的建构来达到人类的可持续发展。而我所说的伦理文明观的要义。 是以伦理看待发展，建构关于发展的伦理理念，进行关于发展的伦理质量的伦理评估。我认为呢，建立这个伦理文明观，期待着杜维明先生所说的那一种文明对话。在塞克斯教授所讨论的全球伦理的这样一个维度或者意义上，从他今天演讲的内容来看。 我觉得需要进行3大文明对话，一个就是关于文明观的对话，也就是说什么才是伦理？因为在这个到底什么才是伦理这样一个意义上，不同文明体系有不同的理解，中西方也有不同的理解。而中国的伦理这个概念、伦理观念是强调先有一个伦的认同，我们大家都在一起，然后再建构一种生活的法则、伦理的法则。而西方伦理观是从亚里士多德开始就把它当成是一种风俗习惯和个人在风俗习惯基础上形成的呢是品质和气质，就是从个体出发形成的伦理观和从实体出发形成的伦理观，对我们今天建构全球伦理以及对于可持续发展的解决方案显然是不同的。我们需要进行一场关于伦理观的对话。第二个
樊老师，
对话是，
您稍等一下，给我们点时间翻译好吗？
好，
谢谢。
有可能讲快了，
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, for enlightening us on the global ethics and sustainable development. I think at the core, in order to achieve sustainable development, we need to establish a new view on civilization. In the book by Amartya Sen, Development from the View of Freedom, he has advocated that we need to change our view on development and civilization. And at the very foundation, I believe we should establish a new ethical view that will further lead to sustainable development instead of simply measuring development from an ethical perspective. So in order to build such a brand new civilizational view on ethics, we could draw from Professor Tu Weiming's concept of civilizational dialogue, in which there are 3 main dialogues we need to conduct, I think. The first one is a dialogue on civilizational view. We know that the East and the West consider very differently the foundation of ethics. In China, what leads to ethics is to first establish a person, and it's based on the establishment or the cultivation of the person that we can identify with each other and establish a set of ethical rules. While in the West, starting from Aristotle's, the whole network of ethics or the ethical rules are based on the customs established in society. So in order to achieve sustainable development, we need to first talk to each other to establish a new global ethical view.
Thank you。第一个是关于伦理观的文明对话，第二个是关于全球观的伦理对话。这个对话的要义是到底什么是全球？关于全球如何在伦理的意义上来理解全球？因为我们所建构的是一个全球伦理。那么中西方文化对全球有不同的理解，比如说从印度文化发展而来的世界这个概念，它就是个时间和空间的概念。也有中国人的天下这个概念，中国文化的天下这个概念，还有来自于西方的，我觉得主要是来自于西方的国际这样一个概念，同时还有我们今天所流行的全球化这样一个概念。那么这4大概念影响着我们对全球伦理的理解和建构。我们进行这第2个对话的目的是如何将全球当成是一个真正的伦理共同体。好，请翻译。
The second dialogue we need to have is to talk to each other about what is global. We view the concept of global in quite different ways. There are, for example, the Indian concept identifying the global in the temporal and the spatial sense. There is also the Chinese understanding of under heaven. So all under heaven is what's global. And from the West, we also have emphasis on what is international is global. And fourth, in recent years, we also have the trend of globalization. So to talk to each other about the potential concept or definition of what is global is the prerequisite of constructing a global view on ethics.
第3个是关于正义观的对话， 塞克斯先生刚才讲到这个可持续发展的问题的时候，第一个问题就是这个正义问题。关键问题是什么才是正义？这在中西方有不同的理解。正义在语义上可能有两个维度，一个是在所有的义当中有一个最恰当的义，第二个才是正义是相对于非正义的。所以哈佛大学有一个教授叫曾经写过一本书，叫这个水质正义，何种合理性。如果我们不对正义来达成一种基本的伦理共识，如解决全球正义问题，以及以正义作为一个重要的伦理理念来达到可持续发展，可能是比较困难的。所以我认为，只有进行多维明先生这样一个文明对话的意义上，进行不同文化传统下的这三大文明对话，才能建构起基本的全球伦理以及关于全球伦理的共识。
The third thing we need to talk to each other about is what is justice. As Professor Sachs mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture, justice is very important for a global sustainable development. But first things first, what is justice? The Chinese and Western understandings can be drastically different. We either talk from a positive or a negative view of what is justice. It could also be, for example, the opposite of injustice. There are even many books discussing the topic of justice, but we need to reach a consensus regarding what is justice. Otherwise, it's quite unlikely that we can build a global ethical view that will finally lead to sustainable development. So I strongly believe that we should first carry out our dialogues in all these three aspects.
第三个问题是这个全球伦理与可持续发展的关系，是塞克斯教授今天演讲的主题。按照我的理解，那个塞克斯教授呢是把全球伦理作为关于可持续发展的一个重要的解决方案之一。那么这一关系的关键是也是同样如杜维明先生所说的。我们到底是将全球伦理，或者是当伦理当成是可持续发展的工具理性，还是价值理性？到底是当作认知理性，还是良知理性？只有将全球伦理当成全球良知，并且是使它成为全球的最低的也是最大的共识，才能建立起真正的全球伦理。在这个意义上，一个解决方案，重要的解决方案就是必须要消除价值霸权。包括三大价值霸权，一个就是文明体系内部各种文明要素之间的价值霸权，尤其是经济的价值霸权；第二个是各种文明体系关系当中的价值霸权，比如说文明中心主义；第三个就是人和自然关系当中的人类中心主义的价值霸权，就是塞克斯教授当中是谈到环境问题等等。好，这就是我的基本的回应和这个体会。
The topic of Professor Sachs' lecture today is the relationship between global ethics and sustainable development. That's the very core of our discussion today. And global ethics here is considered as one of the many solutions or pathways towards sustainable development. But the key here is actually how we should consider global ethics. Do we simply consider it as a means or a value, or as Professor Tu Weiming advocated, as a consciousness of the humankind? This is where we can discuss and maybe to let global ethics play the biggest part. And the solution I propose here is to first remove or eradicate all the value hegemony. First is among the different value views of various civilizations, especially those in economy. And the second is the to remove the value hegemony between the civilizations in their relations, especially the civilizational centrism to highlight or emphasize only a certain civilizations. And the third is, as Professor Sachs mentioned, we also should fight with anthropocentrism. Instead of considering humankind as the center of the world, we need to have a more objective view.
Okay, now we will invite Professor Tucker to speak, and you have about 10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Professor Du for convening us, and Professor Wu for moderating us, and Professor Ping for your last comments, and of course, Jeffrey Sachs for charging us with a very important notion of a global ethics. So I wanted to begin actually in a very personal way, and that is my grandfather was a historian of Western Europe who taught at Columbia for his whole career. And Columbia, as Jeff knows, we share this great institution, was a place that established actually after World War I courses on Western civilization to explore Aristotle and so on, and to try and avoid the wars that were arising in Europe and so on. So that was the origin of the great books at Columbia, which has a considerable history and so on. And my grandfather's a great supporter of the League of Nations. He was our ambassador to Spain in the Second World War to keep Spain neutral under Roosevelt. But his student was William Theodore de Barry, who after the Second World War helped to establish at Columbia, I think, one of the greatest programs in Asian studies through translations of classics, through courses which are still in place today for undergrads and grads. Namely, how do we understand, just as was mentioned by Professor Ping, how do we understand the values, the history, the culture of these traditions of Asia? Asia is the largest population in the world. Almost a third of the world's people live there. How are we going to create a global ethics or a dialogue of civilization without understanding these great classics, this extraordinary 5,000-year-old history, and so on? Professor Du has been working tirelessly on this, as was just mentioned, a dialogue of civilizations. And this has been true at the UN against great odds. A dialogue of civilizations is what's absolutely needed at this point. But I want to just also provide a little bit of historical context for thinking about a global ethics in a very specific way. And I want to mention in thinking about this, the work of Thomas Berry, who is a great friend of Ted de Barry, and they went to China in 1948 to study Confucianism, to begin to understand this amazing civilization. They brought that back to Columbia and to Fordham and to us as their students. But the notion that a global civilization, a global ethics, is being born right now, I think can give us some hope that despite the incredible obstacles we are up against, I want to mention a few things that have been done. One, I'm actually beginning with something just 2 years ago, and that's Jeff's project and book with many other people, Ethics in Action for Sustainable Development, that Columbia published in 2022. But I want to back up as well and say that the global ethics that Hans Kung provided at the request of the board of the Parliament of World Religions in 1993 was a beginning of this kind of discussion. We talked to Hans Kung, who I think all respect enormously, and I don't think he fully understood the environmental issues that we now understand much more. And so that was revised later, almost 15 years later, to include the environment more specifically. There's also a charter of compassion that Karen Armstrong and others developed, and that came out in November of 2008, and it's still a basis for dialogue and action and so on that's worth considering. I want to mention the Universal Declarations of the Rights of Mother Earth, and that came out in Cochabamba in 2010 with 30,000 indigenous peoples who were involved in preparing and drafting that. And it actually did even come to the General Assembly at the UN. So these, I think, are very, very important precedents. But the most significant, I would mention, and I've said this to Jeff on other occasions, is the Earth Charter. And Du Ming is very familiar with that. He was part of a number of the meetings in the drafting of the Earth Charter and so on. That is a hugely important, I think, background to be brought forward in relation to a global ethics for sustainable development. If I describe it, the Earth Charter is a declaration of fundamental ethical principles for building a just, sustainable, and peaceful global society in the 21st century. It seeks to inspire in all peoples a new sense of global interdependence and shared responsibility for the well-being of the whole human family, the greater community of life, and future generations. It's a vision of hope and a call to action. It's centrally concerned with the transition to sustainable ways of living and sustainable human development. Ecological integrity is one major theme. However, the Earth Charter recognizes that the goals of ecological protection, the eradication of poverty, equitable economic development, respect for human rights, democracy, and peace, all the topics that Jeff has so eloquently mentioned, they are interdependent and indivisible. The Charter then provides a new, inclusive, integrated ethical framework to guide the transition to a sustainable future. It's a product of decade-long, worldwide, cross-cultural dialogue on common goals and shared values. The Earth Charter project began as a UN initiative, but it was carried forward and completed by a global civil society initiative. It was finalized and launched as a People's Charter in 2000 by the Earth Charter Commission. Now, the drafting of the Charter, of which I was a part, and as I mentioned, Du Ming was also very much involved, it was the most inclusive and participatory process ever associated with the creation of an international declaration. This process is the primary source of its legitimacy as a guiding ethical framework. It's been further enhanced by the endorsement of over 4,500 organizations, including some governments and international organizations like the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the largest such organization for the environment. Let me briefly say, and I can bring it to a conclusion, but I just want to give a brief outline of how this emerged, because this is possible. This is perhaps a document that we can bring forward precisely for what Jeff is speaking about, because it came out of such a long process. And I want to give particular credit to Stephen Rockefeller, who led the drafting committee, which was composed of 25 people from all over the world. Most of them were not speakers of English as their first language, so it was extremely inclusive. I want to mention at the Harvard conferences that we did on world religions and ecology at Harvard, again, with help from Du Ming, every conference on the world's religions and their ecological views had the Earth Charter as a concluding discussion. How can the values of these traditions be brought forward for a document for sustainability for the future and for future generations, as Jeff has mentioned? I want to give one quick example of the inclusivity. So first of all, those of you who are familiar with the Charter know that this was brought forward by Maurice Gorbachev to say we need a 10 commandments for the future of the planet. And he partnered with Maurice Strong, a businessman from Canada, and the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development was a place where this began to be launched. At the 97 conference, the Rio +5 conference, there was an electrifying moment when Gorbachev held up this document, even though it was still being drafted, and said, this is what we need for a future of sustainability and flourishing. And I was standing in the row, sitting in the row actually, where indigenous peoples who had been involved in the drafting were sitting there as well. And they were weeping because they felt for the first time in an international document, their worldview was included. And that's because in the preamble, and I want to underscore the level of inclusivity here, not only of peoples, but of worldviews and cosmovisions that they represent. Because these words actually came out of a small group meeting with Du Weiming and Eric Chasen at Pacantica, the Rockefeller Center in New York. It says, humanity is part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a unique community of life. That perspective is what is needed for a truly comprehensive global ethics. And the indigenous peoples, in listening to Gorbachev read that as part of the Earth Charter, were weeping with joy to see that their cosmovision was part of this charter. Now, as I conclude, I would just say the inclusivity of the process was extraordinary. This was presented to Mandela at the Parliament of World Religions, again, where Du Weiming was present, Stephen Rockefeller was present, and it was a huge ceremony of the presentation of the charter to Mandela, a very moving moment. And the final text was presented in The Hague in 2000. And since then, it's had all kinds of repercussions. We just had an Earth Charter meeting at Rollins College, a conference back in this spring 2024, the topic being reimagining education for ecological civilization, which I want to give a great shout out to this movement within China for ecological civilization, affecting even how people here in the West are rethinking education. So I'll conclude by saying the pillars of the Earth Charter, which I think can be a comprehensive global ethics for sustainable development, are respect and care for the community of life, that broad sense, the entire community of life, the Earth community. And the three pillars that hold that together are ecology, justice, and peace. So the ecological integrity of ecosystems, which Jeff has referred to and so on, if that is damaged, everything goes down. That is primary. And within that context, social and economic justice have to be seen as a subsystem of the ecological systems of the Earth. Many ecological economists are saying this, and for a long time. And finally, the third pillar, which again, Jeff mentioned, and we all understand, the urgency of democracy, nonviolence, and peace. And the Indian participant, Kamala Chowdhury, in the drafting insisted that nonviolence be part of this document. So ecology, justice, and peace are the pillars for this global ethics that I think we can build on with Jeff's help, with Du Weiming's help, and many, many other people as well. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Du Weiming.
Okay, thank you, Professor Tucker. And we will invite Professor Sachs to make some responses to the two professors. Okay.
Well, thank you both for absolutely wonderful observations and guidance. And I think that we have really some also very practical guidance of things to do with the Earth Charter, with the civilizational dialogue, and I believe also the importance of bringing this to governments, because we need a political structure in the world that also incorporates the fundamental ideas of global ethics. I, of course, am reminded not only of the Earth Charter and its importance, but also of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that document, of course, is a document that was guided in a process similar to what Mary Evelyn Tucker just described, in that case led by Eleanor Roosevelt, but also with her deputy chair, P.C. Chang, also a Columbia graduate, as a matter of fact, a student of John Dewey in the 1920s at Columbia University, and probably of Carlton Hayes also. So I would guess that there's a lot of his wisdom in that. Now, the Universal Declaration was made in 1948, and it needs an updating, I think. And the Earth Charter and the civilizational dialogue can really help to inform that. We just had, and I'll be very brief, but we had a UN Summit of the Future this past September, which produced a call for a fundamental reform of the UN itself. And I just want to link that also into our discussion about global ethics, because the UN was the attempt of mid-century in the 20th century of creating a governance structure that embodied ethical principles. And it is a big advance, I would say, on any such effort before. There hasn't been so much effort at global governance before, but it's time for renovation. We are facing distinct 21st century challenges that were, of course, not the challenges of 1945 or 1948. So I hope that we can continue this exact discussion in a practical way for thinking about next steps. The meetings that we've been having at the Vatican, at the Aristotle Confucius Symposium, the Earth Charter meetings are all pointing, of course, in the same direction, and are all reflecting a hunger for a shared global project that can put us back in the right direction. And so let me just say thanks to both of the discussants. Let's see how we can take this, I hope, also back to the UN context, so that we can have our governments reflect that they are not achieving for their citizens or for the world what is needed right now. And by the governments adopting a common global civilizational understanding, a common charter, a common update of a universal declaration of global ethics, I think we can make a major contribution to setting the course on a better direction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sachs. Now we will open the floor to the audience, and anyone has any question can raise now. You can raise questions either in English or in Chinese. 大家可以用中英文提问，用中文提问的话，我们有翻译。好，哪位？
吴老师，要不？
好，建宝。
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. What a brilliant speech, as always. This is Jianbao Wang speaking. First regards and deep gratitude from Professor Tu Weiming and his wife, Madame Ai Bei. As a disciple of Professor Tu, of course, a bad one, and the director of curriculum design at the CKGSB, Cheung Kong Graduate School of Business, Changjiang Shangxu Yuan in Chinese. I'm deeply involved in developing curriculum on humanities and business ethics, and CKGSB has employed humanities courses for business teaching since 2005. My role also includes teaching the first class on humanities for EMBA entrepreneurs. As you know, Professor Tu has managed as early as the 1980s to establish the identity of Confucian entrepreneurs to reflect the problematic of Max Weber, the Protestant ethics, and the spirit of capitalism by revitalizing particular resources, such as, but of course not limited to Confucian teaching. And your expertise in this field, Professor Sachs, is invaluable. You could have a similar problematic, as mentioned in your book, like this line. It's said that in the polite company, one doesn't talk about politics or religion. In this volume, we do pretty much both, yet find the company very polite. Anyway, I have encountered a daily challenge. Despite the high regard for my teaching, some EMBA entrepreneurs seem neither willing nor able to appreciate the idea of long-term thinking, against myopia. Their response often echoes like, this is a great class, Dr. Wang, you are a nice teacher, but how does it help me now? I need to pay my works tomorrow. Of course, making money is preliminarily essential for a business entity. More than 22,000 CKGSB alumni contribute nearly 20% of China's GDP, approximately 4% of the global GDP. Their mindsets and faiths play a significant role in sustainable development, also underscoring the importance of our work. So, Professor Sachs, how can we help entrepreneurs better in the Confucian economic sphere, especially in mainland China, overcome transcendental anxieties, but build a deep, authentic identity without the creation myth in China, but with the common humanity and shared aims of human flourishing under heaven? Thank you very much.
Wow, what a wonderful question, and I find it very exciting, your work on the curriculum for this. I think that there are a few things that I would say. First, all of us need, and that's true whether you're teaching business students or students of any discipline. We are all citizens. We're all part of society, and we all need to understand our ethics as citizens of our nations and of the world. And so even if the business school student is asking, what does this mean for me as a businessman? First, it means something for that person as a citizen, because we're in the midst of a massive global challenge where our success depends on a shared understanding across society. And most of the problems that we're dealing with are not well understood. And the skill, part of ethics is to cultivate the ability to take a view of the common good, or to take a view from a perspective of an interconnected society. And so I think our curriculum for our students needs to do this no matter which department or discipline, to understand our interconnectedness, to understand the ecological challenges, and so on. Then are specifically the ethics of business people. And this is, of course, a major question in the United States as well. The business says, my job is to make money for my company. I don't have the luxury to be ethical, so-called. But this is, of course, a very simplistic view. At a minimum, I believe that there are basic business ethics that are necessary even at the individual level. Do not make profits at the harm of the rest of society. Strive to make a contribution that is a value added to society, not an imposition of costs on the rest of society. Understanding in practical terms, in case studies, what that means, how to avoid doing harm, how to avoid business behaviors that are exploitative, what it means for a business to be a good business citizen, are very practical issues that business people need to understand. I would say that there's a third dimension in addition to ethics of citizens and ethics of business operations, is the ethics of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are something distinct from business people. Entrepreneurs are organizers of new approaches. And for a true entrepreneur, the understanding of the direction of change of society, why we're even talking about an ecological civilization, what are the great challenges that the world is facing, why are certain technologies likely to become important in the future because of these challenges. This is something that an entrepreneur needs to understand, even to be just effective as a business entrepreneur. Why is the world heading in a particular direction? Because the world needs to address ecological challenges, or the world needs to address challenges of inequality. And therefore, the world needs innovations in particular ways. So I believe all of this is necessary from a teaching point of view, and very enriching, even if students don't understand exactly why at the beginning. It will be something that will last with them, because these issues, these ethical issues, what is good? How should I behave? Why is government asking businesses to do this or that? What is the international dimension? How do we keep peace? And so forth, are lifelong issues that maybe a student doesn't even recognize early on. But of course, at the core of Confucian beliefs and Aristotelian beliefs is the need for training, the need for ethical training, for cultivation. And I think Confucius was often rather frustrated with his disciples asking the wrong questions or not fully appreciating the importance of what he was trying to convey. But the belief that education ultimately is the way to open the mind and open the spirit. And this is certainly Aristotle's view as well. All of that is to say, your curriculum sounds wonderful. Keep developing it. If I can be of any help, I would love to be. And your students will benefit enormously from the direction you're taking.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You know,
Okay.
Professor Tu hopes that the Confucian entrepreneurs are public intellectuals who are politically concerned, socially engaged, culturally informed, and of course, commercially profited. Like you mentioned just now, ecological man, but also cultural man and economic man. Simultaneously, it sounds like too much to be achieved. Thank you.
Step by step.
Now we have some other, actually we have many questions from the audience. And now we probably we cannot answer all of these questions. We will select some. And one question, I will read it. Yeah, it's what about the challenges brought out by AI as global conflicts have been upgraded into an intensive level? Okay.
Yes.
That's the question. Yeah.
Yes. The first, the advances of AI are I think transformative, and the effects of these advances, for example, of course, the large language models, the humanoid robots that will be coming in the next years, are going to have profound effects on society. So in the debate of whether these are small and incremental changes ahead or large and disruptive changes ahead, my own understanding is that they will be very large. There are many issues involved, of course, with the AI and many ethical issues involved with AI. Just let me mention a couple very quickly. There's no doubt that AI systems, because of their actual technological capacities, are going to have a huge effect on income distribution and on the future of work. In fact, there are real reasons to believe that large parts of society could be impoverished as a result of the AI advances, just as AI will also advance the economy in other ways. We're likely to see a further concentration of income and wealth. And today I noted, as I was looking it up, Elon Musk, the world's richest person, has a net worth today of $380 billion. One person. He could well become the first $1 trillion net worth individual the way things are going. At the same time, many people will be impoverished as their jobs are lost. So this is one aspect of the AI question. Of course, a second dimension of the AI question is the human capacity to adjust to a world in which reality versus illusion will be extraordinarily difficult to discern. We already understand fake images, deep fake video content, and so forth that are extremely dangerous and extremely troubling. Third, we understand, of course, that AI systems have built into them many kinds of biases, hallucinations, and reflections of the data on which these AI systems are trained. just to add a third category of concern. A fourth, of course, is the many different scenarios of runaway systems, especially if AI becomes incorporated into autonomous weapons, into cyber warfare, into info wars, into targeting of information, loss of privacy, public surveillance. These are all absolutely enormous questions. Now, there's one point that I would emphasize that we're having an extremely hard time with in general, and that is that the numbers of people who have a deep understanding of the state of this rapidly advancing technology or suite of technologies is very small. This means that power is in the hands of very small groups, including a few large companies and governments. And we as citizens don't really have a deep understanding of how our data are being used, how we're being watched, how we may be manipulated in targeted news or other methods that are now available that were not even conceivable just a few years ago. And it raises a general point for me, which is how advanced technologies are governed in general. In the United States, advanced technologies are in the hands of two groups, either very powerful private companies or the military. And either way, the citizens' control over or even ability to understand these changes is very small. And we're seeing tremendous dangers from this concentration of power that comes from the power of the technologies themselves. So without addressing all of the specific aspects of AI, what I would say is that not only is the rapid advance of technology likely to make very large and disruptive changes in social organization, but they're also likely to concentrate power in ways that are probably not conducive to the common good. And this is already happening. I think, I regard Elon Musk as a genius, as an inventor, but he's also, in effect, become our prime minister in the United States because he's probably the most powerful person in the new administration. He paid the most to support the election of President Trump. He is the insider. He's running the leading high-tech businesses. He runs the leading social media. This is something, and he's the richest person in the world. And this is a concentration of influence, power, politics, and technology that it's very hard to think of a comparable such concentration. And I don't know whether our social institutions, I'm pretty sure our social institutions are not yet adapted to these realities to ensure the protection of the common good. So I just raise this as a flag. And it also means at a global level, our capacity to understand and govern these institutions for human safety and human well-being is something completely new. And again, we're only racing behind as these technologies soar in their power.
Okay, we still have some other questions. Now I will read one from a professor of Tsinghua University. He said, I would greatly appreciate your insights on how to effectively promote the transfer of climate change mitigation technologies from the global north to the global south. In your view, should this form of technology transfer the no, I cannot. Transfer the production and ways of life. Additionally, technologies such as cyborgs, gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, and memory chips may break through the existing physical and cognitive boundaries of humans as biological entities. How do you view the global ethics and the sustainable development in the context of AI? So
Yes.
the other part almost the same with last question.
Yes.
Would you say something to?
So again, it's quite startling how we are in a period of dramatic technological acceleration. And I think that it's also quite notable, for example, that this year's Nobel Prizes in both physics and chemistry were for artificial intelligence. And I find it also quite stunning that the chemistry Nobel Prize went to non-chemists. It went to some computer programmers who used their computer programming insight to solve a classical chemistry problem of protein folding, but not by using the knowledge of chemistry, but the knowledge of artificial intelligence to make a deep learning model that could solve the protein folding problem. All of this is to say the rate of technological breakthroughs are stunning. Now, this means, first of all, that the potential to solve long-standing problems in healthcare, in education, in food production, and in other critical areas are quite real. These are real advances in know-how that can have a profound effect. But as I was emphasizing before, they also concentrate power and wealth to an extent that is completely shocking and unprecedented as well, to the extent that we don't really even know exactly what's being done in this by the cutting edge companies and cutting edge use of these technologies by government. So I can only repeat, the governance of advanced technologies has become a critical issue for us. I don't want to divert or digress, especially at this late hour, but except to say, I believe that the COVID epidemic came from US dangerous laboratory research. And even if that's not the case, it might have come from such research because the work is being done secretly and it is not being properly governed or monitored. And this is, for me, a central challenge and a central question. I don't think it's going to be very easy to solve because as one of our philosophers said 400 years ago, Francis Bacon, knowledge is power. And those with power rarely voluntarily relinquish their power. And so we have a true governance issue that is an unsolved issue. I don't want to give a glib answer to it. On a much more practical level, there was another aspect of the question that I want to say something about, and that is about the transfer of technologies from the technologically advanced countries to the poorer countries. And here I just want to say that China's Belt and Road Initiative, I regard as one of the most important and positive initiatives in the world, because it is an initiative specifically aiming to help developing countries to gain 21st century capacities in infrastructure, in ecological technologies, in renewable energy, and in other areas. And it's doing it in the right way, which is as a partnership between China, which is at the cutting edge in many of these technologies, and partner countries. And I really applaud the Belt and Road Initiative. I think it's the most novel, interesting, and high potential of all development initiatives in the world right now. It does have the Chinese ethical spirit to it. It's a novelty as well. So China itself is learning how to make it more effective, how to work more effectively with the partner countries. But I want to encourage its continued expansion with more partners, with higher scale, because I think that China can make an enormous contribution, not only to the building of the economies of the partner countries, but also their know-how and their technological capacity as well. So as a practical matter, it is a solution to the question that's asked, how can we have technology transfer to the countries that need it? Programs like the Belt and Road Initiative can play a major role in that direction.
Okay, we still have many questions, but our time is limited, and I will read the questions of Professor Ni Peimin and Professor Zhao. And first, Professor Ni's question, he has two questions. The first is also about AI. His question is, should AI be considered the fifth dimension of sustainable development? I think Professor Sachs has talked a lot about AI. Perhaps you can decide whether you will say about this. And then the second question of Professor Ni is about global ethics. Besides Hobbes, the West had also David Hume and Immanuel Kant, among others, and an outline of global ethics has been laid out for a while. The question is how to implement it. Using Bernard Stiegler's words, we need to find ways to extra-somatize it into social systems and cultures. Do you have any suggestions for this?
Great. So let me quickly answer these. The Sustainable Development Goals will be updated probably in the year 2027, because we'll have a global summit at the UN to consider the next phase of the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the things that will happen in that time is indeed that digital technologies, and especially AI, will become one of the goals with targets around it for the next phase of sustainable development. So I don't know whether it will be the fifth dimension of the SDGs, but it will become one of perhaps the 18th Sustainable Development Goal, that ethical artificial intelligence be deployed for the benefit of the common good and for sustainable development. When it comes to how to implement global ethics, the most important area that we need is indeed dialogue. We need the ability to talk with each other and understand, and for our students also and young people to be part of this dialogue. One of the paradoxes that I don't understand is that in a world in which we're so interconnected, we seem to have such a hard time with dialogue across civilizational divides. To me, it's a paradox. What could be more fun, at least for me, than to be with you today and to be having this discussion and for me to be able to learn from you? And I would like to imbue education worldwide with that idea and that approach. It seems to me, even in our junior high schools and our high schools, our classrooms can be globally connected. Our students in the United States can work with students in China on joint projects, on papers, on video links, on Zooms like we're doing. It shouldn't be restricted only to the fun of us as professors that we get to do this, but this should be a common occurrence. In the United States right now, as you know, I'm sad to say, there is hostility towards China, but there is profound lack of knowledge, basic knowledge of China, knowledge of Chinese history, knowledge of the greatness of Chinese civilization, knowledge of the joy of learning from Confucius or Mencius or other great civilizational traditions. It's something so exciting, it should be absolutely natural, but it's not happening properly. And so I think that at least we as educators can think about how to bring young people together so that they are naturally part of civilizational dialogue, not hitting them over the head with it, but as part of their normal life as citizens, as in a digitally interconnected world. So I just want to say that the development and the next steps of global ethics partly involves going to the UN, partly bringing our governments together in a more fruitful way, but it's also bringing young people together so that it's absolutely natural that Americans and Africans and young Arab boys and girls and Chinese students are seeing each other indeed as shared global citizens. And I think we can do this. I think one of the great benefits of our digital age is educational innovation. We can find new ways to teach, new ways to engage our students, and new ways to ensure that they are part of and draw joy from a true civilizational dialogue.
Okay, another question from Professor Zhao is, Professor Sachs, can we measure the acquisition of ethical knowledge? If not, how can we know if all the attractive recommendations made by the speakers have value? Surely the way of acquisition of ethical knowledge is very different from that of epistemic or technical knowledges.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you at a personal level, mm-hmm. when I read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics for the first time, and I did it as an adult, not as a student, because I didn't realize as a student how important it would be. And so I came to it as later in life. It was so exciting and joyful for me. And I not only marveled at the wisdom of this teacher from 2,300 years ago, but I also felt a thrill to see encapsulated in such a vivid way a deep appreciation of human nature and the potential for choosing to live a good life. Now, when I have read very much again as a beginner Confucian texts and the Mencius and the Analects, again later in life, I have found that to be a thrill, a joy, and also a sense, boy, this is different from Aristotle, it's different from my natural tradition, but it is deeply enriching and something that I can see brings a not something contrary, but absolutely added dimensions to my understanding of the social good and how to achieve it. So one thing about great philosophy is you feel its greatness. There's a kind of profound attachment that you feel to it as you're led into it by wonderful mentors and by your own knowledge. Ethical knowledge in this sense isn't a scientific proof. It isn't a technique. What it is a cogent answer to a question: how should I live to live a good life? And I think that while we have debates, of course, about that issue for more than 2,000 years, we also have a font of tremendous insight and wisdom that we can impart and share and use for the challenges that we are facing. And so we're not going to get the axiomatic proofs of ethics. And Aristotle was the first to say, you can't expect the same precision in the field of ethics that you would in the field of mathematics, for example. But we can know good ethics that address our human needs. And we have them in the Confucian and the Aristotelian traditions and in many other traditions as well. And our job is to help bring our job as teachers and as shared global citizens is to bring this civilizational knowledge to wider awareness. And that's what I hope we are doing. Let me thank you all very, very much for your patience in listening to me, and also for the wonderful questions and all of the guidance. And I very much look forward to continuing these discussions in the coming weeks and months. I think we have some practical things we can do together to move this civilizational dialogue forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, and also thanks to all the questions and the two professors as discussions. Actually, we still have many questions from the audience, but we really don't have time to answer them. And we hope to have another chance to discuss more about these important issues with Professor Sachs and the others. So this lecture should be completed now. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Most grateful. 谢谢.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.